And now, ladies and gentlemen, the very last, definitely not the least conversation. I think we have some of our colleagues coming from the fourth floor. How you feeling? Would you do this all over again? I can only hear one voice, but that's fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to ask you to kindly settle down for our last conversation. Rebecca, are we ready? Okay. So my discussants are ready. Please give a warm welcome to two of the continent's most recognizable voices. Join me in welcoming CNN's Larry Madowo in conversation with Westprop Holdings Zimbabwe CEO Mr. Ken Sharp to give us a conversation on 1 billion bricks, reimagining African development. Please warmly welcome them. They are seated.
Thank you. She said warmly welcome and only 2 people clapped. I'm starting to feel some type of way about that.
We can add to that, right?
Thank you. We came a long way from Zimbabwe and Kenya to be here to talk about this. And I'm so glad that, Ken, you're here with us to talk about this 1 billion bricks and what you're doing in Zimbabwe. You're bullish about the economy. You're bullish about Zimbabwe, even when all the headlines say you should not be. So let's start from the top. What is 1 billion bricks?
Thanks, Larry, for the question. It's really important. And just to clarify, it took me 21 hours to get here.
21 hours, a long way from Harare.
Leaving tomorrow morning, so another 21 hours back. I'm less time on the ground in Washington than in...
He did all that just to come speak to you guys. How
just
amazing
to be here
is
for
that?
you. So yeah, 1 billion bricks. It's a journey that's taken a long time. You know, Tsao says a journey of 1,000 miles starts with 1 step. This journey started with many steps. And the final step, actually, I owe to the USA, to America, to an institute called Harvard Business School in Boston. I studied there for 3 years and graduated last year. And in the final year, they taught us that everything we thought we knew in business, we didn't really know. And that a vision and mission is important. But more important than those 2 things is having a strategy statement in your company, in your organization. And I would say the country, you know. The billion bricks was born in the final year in my cohort, and most people developed 5, 10-year kind of strategy statements. But I decided in Zimbabwe, 1, the environment is going to take longer to get there, and 2, the land that we own is big enough to build 1 billion bricks on it.
Right, so let's take a step back for a second here. You've been focused primarily on properties since 2007. Mm-hmm. You are a serial entrepreneur in Zimbabwe. Your interests span multiple industries. But West Property Holdings has been your main occupation since 2007. And so you own land that can take 1 billion bricks.
That's right.
And so your plan is by 2050, you should have put in 1 billion bricks in the ground.
That's right. So we've primarily got 3 areas of land, about 1,000 acres in the city, in the capital of Zimbabwe, Harare. And it's going to take 1 billion bricks to build out these cities. So we've actually calculated with the land that we currently own, how many bricks are we going to need to do these developments. It's about $5 billion of capital. And we figured we could get there sooner, but we figured by 2050 we'll get there.
Okay, so let's get this out of the way. Do you have $5 billion lying around?
Over the next 26 years, yes.
Okay, carry on.
So to put this vision into reality, we live and breathe at Westprop every day, these bricks. We literally have a brick digital meter on every one of our building sites. We've got 10 current sites, 10 projects on the go at the moment.
Right.
We're increasing it next year by adding another 3 big projects. And at each one of the sites, we've got a digital brick counter that says number of bricks at this site, number of bricks on all sites, and number of bricks in pipeline, which is the total sales that we've generated to date. So we've currently got about 62 million bricks committed, right, which is about 6% of the billion. And we've got there in the last sort of 3 years. So we believe we definitely will get to 1 billion bricks.
So this plan includes bringing Dubai to Zimbabwe, includes the Mall of Zimbabwe, which is going to be one of the largest on the continent, includes a PGA Tour style golf course, includes a lot of other elements. Who is going to buy all this property?
Well, currently, I'll give you a little bit of a clue. So before we get into the bigger project of Pomona City, we're building in an area called Millennium Park, which is in a very upmarket suburb of Borodale in Harare. And we're currently on the 4th building of 1,000 flats that we're putting in.
Right.
Up to now, we've got block 3 under construction, which is in the final 3 months of being finished. And we were fortunate enough to have the president of the country come and open and break ground this building last month. On the 20th of November, he came with the whole of government. We had the vice president, several ministers, and it was, for us, quite an important signal from government that they're not only supporting us, but they actually believe in the vision that we're giving. And on this building that he broke ground on, we had at that day, it was the first ground that was broken. That day when he broke ground, we had 51% of the building sold.
On day one.
On day one. So we don't actually put anything into the ground unless we've pre-sold at least 30% of the development. So we have the confidence of building, knowing that when the building is finished, the project is sold out.
Is this just an elite thing? Because in every society, there will be people with money, people with access to capital, or with access to the right influential people that can afford this sort of thing. Is this a mass market idea?
I think everyone has a role to play. In Zimbabwe, we have, you could argue, between 1 and 1.5 million housing units on a waiting list. The majority of those homes are more affordable, what we call high-density homes. So low-cost homes in a high-density suburb. We are different. Our segment is high income, low density. And in that market, probably we're 1% of the total. But if you take 1% of a million, you still got 10,000 units. And we're selling at the moment about 500 units a year. So we believe there's enough pipeline, not only for us, but for other competitors to actually enter the segment we're in. And we've seen it. I did a comparison for the president to show him that in that area we were building the 1,000 flats, where the Mall of Zimbabwe is, where there's office parks. We have $500 million of investment going into that one node. And the area around us, within 1 kilometer radius, has 20 other developers currently building, and the combined value of just the housing that they're building right now is $100 million. So others are following in our footsteps.
What happens if tomorrow Zimbabwe changes currency again?
Yep.
Because right now, 80% of the transactions are carried out in US dollars in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it could be even higher. I was speaking to the bread manufacturer, and they were telling me as high as 94% of their sales in US dollars.
Right.
So I think it's clear that our economy has dollarized. And the reason is because of the lack of trust in the currency. If you go back into history, 2008, the height of hyperinflation, you all know and have heard of the $100 trillion note.
Right.
When it was printed, it was $200 US. A month later, it was $1. A month after that, it was 1 cent. So complete savings were wiped out of the economy. And this is currently, we're in the 3rd hyperinflation of Zimbabwe. Our currency currently officially is around 6,000 to 1, unofficially 9,000 to 1. And yet, a few years back, government redenominated the currency as 1 to 1.
Right.
So the problem is, once burnt, twice shy. People just simply don't trust local currency. And for this reason, we're very encouraged that the president recently, at ZCon, I was invited as a speaker at the Zimbabwean Economic Development Conference in Victoria Falls just over a month ago. And I presented a paper why the real estate sector had stabilized and, in fact, grown, in some cases, 12-fold in the last 15 years.
Right.
And the single reason was that not one transaction in the last 15 years has been in local currency. You will not find a seller of a home today willing to sell his home unless he's being paid in US dollars. So we need the confidence of a currency that you can calculate risk, because the problem with the local currency is actually the risk calculation. And when you price the premium of that risk, it actually distorts pricing. So I presented a paper, and the next day the president actually announced that he wasn't going to support multi-currency. He wanted the country to go back to Zimbabwe dollars.
So if I'm getting you correctly, the dollarization of the Zimbabwe economy is actually good for business.
I believe so. And if we look at the confidence the government has given in it, after that conference, 2 weeks later, they made a law pronouncing that the currency would be extended in a multi-currency environment for the next 7 years, until 2030. So we've got a guaranteed tenure for the next 6 years trading in US dollars.
There are many people in government, in President Mnangagwa's administration, a lot of Zimbabweans, for patriotic reasons. We're a sovereign nation, we should have our own currency, that would not agree with that decision to keep the dollar until 2030 at least. But as a businessman, you're saying actually this is the best thing to do?
I definitely believe it is. If you look at our economy from the height of hyperinflation, when all savings were wiped out, this is now February 2009, when the country decided, at that time it was actually a unity government, decided that we'd go back to US dollars and wipe away local currency. If you take that period from then until now, 14 years, our GDP then was around $12 billion. Today we're between $40 and $50 billion. And I believe in the next 6 years, we can easily get to between 100 and 150 billion US dollars. That's getting close to the vision of the country's government to get us into an upper middle income society. And if you take other countries that have used dollars for a certain time period to stabilize the economy and to give growth, I think Zimbabwe is going to be the next test case for that.
I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but there's an example you gave before, a comparison between property acquired in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. The South African rand, in case you've not kept up, has not kept up well against the dollar, to say the least.
So I'm sure the audience wouldn't believe this, but it's true. I bought a house, and it was an emotional buy, I admit. My wife wanted to have a house in Johannesburg in a very expensive suburb called Bryanston. And we paid almost $2 million US dollars equity for this home.
Right.
The rand then was around 6 to 1. So this is quite a few years back. Today, the rand is close to 20 to 1. It's just around 19 to 1. And I sold the property this year. I sold it for an equivalent of $700,000. So my negative equity is like 1.3 million. Whereas in Zimbabwe, in the same period where I invested $100,000 in a home, which we converted into an office, we sold it 6 years ago for $700,000. And I spoke to the new owners who'd bought it from the second person, and they said they've just sold it for 1.2 million. So that's 12 times growth in the same period in US dollars.
And the South African house lost you $1.3 million.
That's it.
Even though it's a much more stable economy, it's just the rand has not been doing great.
It's all about the currency. And when you remove that risk, I think investment in and out becomes easier to measure. Because any investor investing anywhere in Africa wants to know, can they get their money in easily, and can they get their money out easily? And I think governments address that really well by having this multi-currency regime until 2030.
All right, fantastic. I mentioned at the top that you're bullish on Zimbabwe, even though the headlines say you should not be, just because there's so much that is not going great. Unemployment at 85%. A lot of people are hopeless. They're leaving the country. They are out of options. How do you see this plan as helping change some of that or contributing to the people that have lost hope?
Look, I think I often say I'm a man of the future because our strategy statement takes us to 2050. I literally live in 2050 because I'm envisioning the city that we're building, and every day I see the buildings go up. Every month we start a new project. I can see that vision being realized day by day. And I often say to people, I'm not living in the moment of today. I'm not living next week or next month or next year or not even in the next 10 years. So my view is much longer than most people. And I think one of the most important things that I believe I'm doing is not actually selling properties. I'm selling hope. Hope of a better future. Hope of a better Zimbabwe. And that hope is what I believe will be the thing that brings people back to Zimbabwe. That hope is the thing that will give people the opportunity who don't have any idea what they can do to lead them to be able to do the things they didn't know they could do.
How does building a mall sell hope?
So I think the mall is a flagship product. It's something that's been on the cards for a long time. Our partners are in South Africa and Johannesburg. They're listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And we, in fact, listed this year on the Zimbabwe Victoria Falls Stock Exchange as well. And they've been developing malls for the last 35 years. And I think the mall shows confidence. It is the biggest mall in Zimbabwe, the Mall of Zimbabwe. And it brings the retailers that haven't been in Zimbabwe before into the mall. So we'll be getting a lot of regional retailers, South African chains, South African brands coming into the mall. It also gives the local population a reason not to travel to Dubai in South Africa, but shop locally.
As somebody who's been in this space for a long time and who's seen all of the challenges that exist in your environment, what do you see as the way out of it? And I know you don't want to be a politician, but also this is deeply interlinked with business and commerce, right?
It is. And I'll use a statement from the government. The president's been saying for the last sort of few years, actually, from let's call it the dispensation when he came into power 6 years ago, the Second Republic. The president has been saying several things. Firstly, he's been saying we're open for business.
Right.
We're an enemy to none and a friend to all. And I think he genuinely means that Zimbabwe is open for business. But he also knows our limitations, that because of the sanctions that are still existing on Zimbabwe today, they are targeted sanctions and they're limited, and the US is the only last country to have the sanctions, but they're still there, and it impacts hugely the financial sector. I think what he's been saying is the Shona words, Nika inovakwa nevenovaya, which means essentially Zimbabweans must build Zimbabwe. And the interesting thing of these 4 words is that the Nika and the Nirvana is actually the country and the people. So you can't separate the country from the people. And this is why I'm very positive about what we're doing, because we're building the country for the people. We're giving the people a reason to come back to Zimbabwe who are not in Zimbabwe today. We're giving a reason for the people in Zimbabwe to commit themselves to their own country, to build their country. Because unfortunately, the truth is, no one's coming. No one's coming to help us. There's not going to be a white knight who comes to save Zimbabwe. There's not going to be huge amounts of billions of dollars from the West to save Zimbabwe. We're going to be the only solution to ourselves is ourselves. And we are going to have to face the reality that we have to build our future now.
So what will make people come back? What is your pitch to there's a big Zimbabwean diaspora community here and everywhere else in the world, in the UK, across Europe, because the country stopped working, so deeply dysfunctional that anyone had an opportunity to leave, left, or is leaving. So what is your pitch for Zimbabweans to come back and rebuild?
Believe in your future. Build your future. I think Zimbabweans have left the country over the last, you could argue, 2 decades, maybe even 3, in large numbers. We have 4 to 5 million Zimbabweans living out the country, which is almost a quarter of our population. Here in the US, I'm told it could be as many as 500,000 people. And those people are typically highly skilled, hardworking, but they love their country. They remember their roots, and they want to come back. So I think what we're doing as a company, as West Prop, is developing city nodes, and our unique selling proposition, our competitive advantage is that we're actually developing lifestyle estates. We're not just building, buildings on their own, call it residential flats.
Right.
We actually build a whole node around it. So you mentioned the golf course. It's the first PGA Championship golf course in Zimbabwe, the second one on the continent. Just the renovation of the golf course is costing us $10 million US. This is a $280 million US project that we're launching in the first quarter of next year. And it's the first time in sub-Saharan Africa that we're going to have branded residences attached to a luxury 5-star hotel. So people in Zimbabwe couldn't imagine a luxury at that level yet. It's ultra luxury.
Right.
But we want to raise the bar so high that it shocks everyone completely. Even our neighbor, South Africa, which is a much more sophisticated, developed economy, doesn't have branded residences. So when we create these lifestyle estates, which we've captured into the slogan of live, work, shop, and play, so live in the homes, work in the offices, shop in the malls, and play in the parks and amenities and facilities we create, the land size that's needed to create such a development has to be large, typically over 100 hectares. And we are fortunate to have 3 nodes that we're developing in Harare of these lifestyle centers. So I think when we sell to the diaspora the vision, it's not just selling a flat in a standalone building somewhere in the city center.
Right.
You're buying into that lifestyle. You're buying into that secure estate where you're safe, where your children can run around in the park, where you can have an entire life ecosystem around you that is sustainable. So we're very much green orientated as well in our developments. And that's really what the proposition is about.
All right. What are the practical challenges of operating in this environment for you who is doing this grand project? And then what do you see as the opportunity?
Look, I think always it comes down to the people. Without the right people, you cannot execute on your vision. And we have a culture of excellence in our company that we're creating, a high-performance culture, we call it, and executing in excellence. So we're very goal-focused. I think there's been too much talk for too long in Zimbabwe. And to be honest, it's mainly the political talk that's been on the cards for the last 2-3 decades. So we want to reverse that narrative and talk about the economy. We want to show with our actions what it is that we're doing, because they speak much louder than my words. And our team is focused on what we call OKRs, Objective Key Results. It's an American concept. A guy called John Doerr wrote a book, Measure What Matters. Google uses it. It's their Bible. And we've implemented a similar system in West Prop. We're really focused on annual objectives, quarterly key results, monthly KPIs, daily check-ins. We have a stand-up check-in every day that we do at 8 o'clock. We've never missed one check-in. 6 of the top management suite stand up.
You really see the Harvard Business School there, right? I'm sorry, I had to. It was too obvious.
So I think it comes back down to leadership at the end of the day. We've been fortunate to be recognized with a huge amount of awards. In fact, our office walls have run out of space to put up the awards.
Right.
But last weekend I was in Harare at the Zimbabwe Institute of Management, which is an old institution since 1957, and they recognized West Prop as the leading private sector winner of the year, and myself as the CEO of the year. So when we got these awards, they gave a speech about the difference between management and leadership. Management is getting people to do the things they don't want to do, and leadership is actually getting people to do the things they didn't know they could do. And I think that's what it's about, is not only myself as a leader in the organization, but all the people underneath me. I call them leaders, because everyone in their own capacity has the opportunity to lead in their own sphere of influence. It could be at home, it could be amongst their peers, it could be amongst family members, and it could be in the workplace. But if we all take on the leadership role and say, let's get everyone to do what they didn't know they could do, then we can achieve the unimaginable. Then we can achieve the impossible.
Talk a little bit about your journey into this, your entrepreneurship from, what, 17?
Yeah.
You've been doing this since you were 17.
That's right.
How did it all begin?
Oh, well, it began with this beautiful lady sitting across the room. I was studying in the UK and came back to Zimbabwe, and she was traveling from the Soviet Union. This is back in 1991, before the Soviet bloc had fallen. She's from Bakhmut, which used to be called Artyomovsk, which is in Ukraine.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's now an occupied war zone with Russia. And I fell madly in love with her and decided to follow her back to the Soviet Union. Dropped out of school at 17, became an entrepreneur, and the rest is history.
That's his wife over there, by the way, in the front row, with the proudly filming this session. And so, of all the things you've done, why did you decide property would be a key plank for it?
You know, one of my Ukrainian partners, I have business in Ukraine, said to me, in the 90s and 2000s, you could say there was similar things happening in the two countries with economic development. We went through what's called ESAP, Economic Structural Adjustment Program, from 1990. And that's when the economy kind of opened up. The walls fell down in the Russian sense, and the economy started to open up. So you saw a similar growth of property values from back in the 90s, early 2000s. You could buy an acre of land for like $20,000. They just broke the record, and an acre of land in Harare was sold for $800,000.
Wow.
In Nairobi and in Cape Town, you can find the same land being sold for $2 to $4 million for an acre of land. So I don't believe we've reached the ceiling yet. But from 20 to 800,000 is 40 times. So I saw that opportunity of the growth of the land value, and we took an active decision, a very strategic and deliberate decision to invest in land, to accumulate land banks, to invest in properties. And to be honest with you, in 2007, I had a ski accident, a life-changing ski accident in Whistler in Canada. And that put things into focus for me. So my priorities became less about having more businesses and more about less is more, and focusing on that one thing that I thought would have the biggest difference, and it happened to be real estate.
I have a few more questions, but I want to make sure if you have any questions in the audience, this is a good time to get them in. Any questions?
I think they're just awestruck. Who said no? Nee, you want to ask a question?
It's over there, yeah, at the back.
Good evening. My name is Nee Simmons. I'm a non-resident fellow at Atlantic Council's Geotech Center. Thank you for your anecdote. Great talking points. You mentioned that Zimbabwe is adopting the U.S. dollar, or it has adopted it. I'm wondering what your thoughts are to Argentina's new president, who has also said that he's adopting the U.S. dollar for Argentina. He's also said some other things. There are some he's very flamboyant, let's just say. But what are your thoughts to what's going on in Argentina?
Well, besides our political classes at Harvard on Argentina, my knowledge of it would be limited. I did go and stay there for 2 months when I tried to climb Aconcagua Mountain. But I think Argentina is its own unique situation. It's different to Zimbabwe. But I do believe that it could help them. If I was to give the simple answer, I would say yes, definitely for the next 5 to 10 years. If they did dollarize the economy, it is a solution for them. And there's some South American countries like Bolivia, for example, that did dollarize and then went back to local currency not so long ago, and it's totally destabilized the economy. Others like Ecuador have continued to maintain dollars, and this has given them the stability to grow to an upper middle income country. In fact, they have a population very similar to Zimbabwe, and they're above 250 billion now, which puts them as an upper middle income country.
All right. Anything else?
So my question again is on dollarization. So how do you see that in a parallel with, like, because I assume we're mostly Anglophones here, at the CFA franc, and where do you see that coming in the parallels between them?
Look, I think any currency that's trusted is an opportunity, is an option. It's just that in Zimbabwe in particular, and in many other developing countries, US dollars is the trusted currency. So the Eurozone is a possibility, but I don't think euros are used as much. We've heard of now a possible new currency that would come into existence in the next few years. Both locally, they've digitalized gold currency. They've introduced a local gold currency. And I think these are all novel ideas, but at the end of the day, it's what people really trust.
And I see some of the criticism about the CFA franc and the French involvement in that, and a lot of these, especially French-speaking West African nations seeking independence, economic independence from France, which is the same argument for some in Zimbabwe about if you're dollarized, then you're still tied to the US government, and some people that want sovereignty want to step away from that, even though it doesn't give the same ability to predict the future for a businessman like you if you are in the dollar as opposed to a reintroduced Zimbabwean currency?
In a global context, I do think that people will move away from dollars in the next 10 years. But I don't think there'll be a large enough move away from dollars to either destabilize the US economy because there's too much debt, especially with China, and I don't see them dumping those bonds. So I think the US dollar is there to remain, and probably it will continue to be a large influential force in the monetary system in the future.
Right, he wants to follow.
Sure, thanks, Ken. You just mentioned that your company is listed now on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, and is trading in dollars. Can you please comment on how liquid that exchange is? And I think it's an opportunity for everyone here to participate in the upside of the 1 billion BRICS vision. Thanks.
So thank you for the question. We listed in April this year, and our share capitalization is about $300 million. We believe we'll grow the equity value of the company to $1 billion. So there's definitely an upside in our counter. The total stock market is a value of about $2 billion today. It's a new market. It's the first stock market in Africa that's totally US dollars. It's a very low tax market, so the transactional costs are very low. And there's special capital concessions on the tax rate. So the most preferential tax agreement in the world with Zimbabwe has a 10% withholding tax, and they've reduced that to 5% from listed entities. So shareholders in the listed entity remitting their dividends would only pay a total of 5% tax under the double taxation agreements with a lot of countries. So I think from efficiency for us, it does make sense. We've had to give up ownership, so 30% of the company ultimately is held in public hands. But we know that the value we're creating far outweighs the loss that we've had on giving up the equity.
Okay, to wrap up here, how much do you worry about political instability? How much do you worry about what politicians say or what happens when you've got so much invested in the economy and still so much of a pipeline coming?
I would say three things. Firstly, because I'm a man of the future, I'm not really concerned about politicians who are elected into office for 5 years. Of course, we work with them. I work with the president. We work with the government. We work with the cabinet. We respect the government in charge. And we believe that there's a role for both private sector and government to play. But because my horizon is, let's say, 50 years, in 50 years' time, Zimbabweans are going to have a completely different, unique environment to what they have today. The second thing I would look at is what's called Hunu in Shona, or Ubuntu, which is this kind of togetherness, oneness. Someone translated it for me at our Christmas event yesterday in Harare to say it's dignified humanity. And I think if you think of that, us people, as a Zimbabwean people, two nations, the Ndebele and the Shona, of oneness, it doesn't really matter what the political affiliations you have or what differences you have. So long as you all are driven by creating that one country that benefits all, then we can work together.
Right.
And lastly, I would say this, is that the greatest asset of Zimbabwe, I've said it many times, is not the resources in the ground, it's not the agricultural fertile land we have, or the beautiful nature, or the minerals that we have billions or tens of billions of dollars. It's really the people of Zimbabwe. They're our greatest asset. And that's who I have confidence in, and that's why I'm building Zimbabwe.
Regardless of the politicians say, regardless of who's elected, you have faith in the people, and that's who you're building for.
That's it.
That's a great place to end it. A big round of applause for Ken Shah, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.